So Henry is going to present their thesis research. She's going to make an examination of transgender stereotypes in Psycho and Dress to Kill and their mirroring of societal transphobia. Just so you know how this will go, we'll have 16 minutes for Henry to present, and then he'll be able to answer questions from the audience. So think about questions that you might have for him about his research, and then I will bestow a stool and cord on him if you're fancy. So thank you all for being here, and turn it over to you.
Thank you. Welcome to my presentation. Let me change this slide. In her poem, Anti-Diaries, my sister Natalie asks, if something does offend, can it still be helpful? What if it offends those it is about? This pointed question regarding trans representation indicates the tension between wanting representation and wanting to be represented correctly. She goes on, what if it increases understanding, empathy, helps those with no connection to the group start to see them as real people, and not just as some concept to critique and pass judgment on? Ideally, trans people being represented on screen would increase understanding, but right now, depictions that are offensive and those that are helpful do not overlap. Representations that are offensive to trans people are such because they actively decrease the desire to understand and instead promote the view that trans people are dangerous, increasing fear. Would you choose this? I began this project with the idea that it would connect me to the trans community and increase my understanding of trans issues. It was going to be an analysis of trans-coded monsters and their connection to societal transphobia, focusing on stereotypes and tropes perpetuated in trans-coded media. Over the course of my first semester working on it, the project narrowed to focus on horror films. I had 6. Insidious Chapter 2, House at the End of the Street, Trans-American Killer, and Silence of the Lambs, as well as my current films. During this past semester, though, my project was impacted by the rising prevalence of transphobia in our society. It was overwhelming to think about transphobia solely in an academic context. I was no longer able to maintain a purely academic view of all of these transphobic representations at once. Limiting my number of films allowed me to stay objective while also incorporating current trans voices, like my sisters and my own. My project narrowed down to 2 of the most influential trans-coded films, Psycho and Dress to Kill. It became an analysis of stereotypes, which characters see the transcoding, and who gets to explain transness. The prevalence of transcoding in horror films since 1960 acts as a mirror to transphobia in American society, and it is time to confront this bias. In this project, I analyzed the trans horror narratives in Psycho, released in 1960 and directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and Dress to Kill, released in 1980 and directed by Brian De Palma, which both include consistent negative depictions of transgender people. The developments of transphobia in film and broader society seem to mirror each other, suggesting that they feed into one another and ultimately amplify transphobia as a whole. Several trans stereotypes have been perpetuated in popular horror films since 1960 and are still consistent now, echoing and amplifying societal fears of trans people, especially trans women. These stereotypes include sexual deviance, violent feminine personas, and mental illness. My research showed that Hollywood plays a significant role in shaping the fears people have about trans people and the ways they respond. So filmmakers have a responsibility to change narratives in order to mitigate the misunderstanding of trans identities. Psycho served as the inspiration for all horror films that followed. From the cinematography to the score, it changed everything about the genre. Starting in 1938, the Hays Code had American cinema in an iron grasp. It prohibited profanity, suggestive nudity, graphic or realistic violence, sexual perversions, and more in any films released between 1938 and 1968. However, Hitchcock's Psycho broke many of its rules. Norman Bates is sexually perverse, Marion Crane is shown nude in the shower, and realistic blood splatters everywhere as the killer brings the knife into Marion's chest. Norman Bates, who runs the Bates Motel, seems at first to be timid, cautious, and subservient to his invalid mother. He is sweet to Marion, a young, pretty woman who is staying at the motel, and appears to want to help her, until we see him watch her undress through a hole in the wall of his parlor. As his sexual desire for her awakens, so does his alternate persona, that of his controlling, jealous mother. His feminine presence within him becomes envious of his attention and seeks to get rid of its competition, so she takes over Norman, turning him into Normal. Dressed to Kill closely mimics the legendary elements of Hitchcock's Psycho. It contains an almost identical bathroom scene, as well as imitating the mysterious cinematography surrounding the killer in order to accentuate the big reveal that the murderous woman is, in reality, a sick man. Like Psycho, Dressed to Kill caused a public uproar at the time of its release. Feminists of the 1980s protested the film in 6 cities across the US, showing their disdain for De Palma, his misogyny, and the romanticization of the murder of women. They were offended by the film because it was misogynistic. De Palma described the plot as a woman's perverse sexual fantasy, and because of the depiction of trans women, whom they thought were abominations. They did not protest the transphobia, but instead that the movie showed trans women killing cis women. They were offended by the indication of their real fear of trans women. Feminists of this era held similar beliefs as TERFs today, rejecting trans women from their community because they believed that trans women were just evil men seeking to invade women's vulnerable spaces. TERF stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, or a feminist who seeks to exclude trans women from the classification of women and women's spaces. Dr. Robert Elliott, the psychiatrist in Dressed to Kill, seems a very calm, collected, and sympathetic man. However, like Norman Bates, he contains a violent female persona in addition to his own, who is awakened when Elliott becomes aroused. Each of his victims-to-be are pretty, feminine women who have come to him for psychiatric help, and both inquire whether he wants to have sex with them. Once these conversations begin, his alternate persona, Bobby, begins to take over. Bobby is able to take the life of Kate Miller, a housewife, but is shot when her hand is poised to slit the throat of Liz Blake, a high-end call girl. Both films include violent female alter egos who prey on attractive women, and masculine arousal is the cause of their murderous rampages. Scholarly discussion of monsters in fiction focuses on the uncanny and the personification of subconscious fears. Horror films seek to awaken those fears and use them to elicit strong emotional responses, so they employ the uncanny in their plots and design. To some people, trans people represent the uncanny because of their breaking of the gender binary. Colin Milburn says that separating oneself from one's fears allows a level of distance and protection. So separating from trans people seems to drive off internal fears of disrupted gender norms. This line of thought suggests that destroying trans people as a whole will make the threat impotent, solidifying the gender binaries that many rely on for their understanding of the world. Jared Quigg argues that horror films' depictions of trans people teach audiences to attack first, in order to prevent the horrific results of a trans woman's rampage and protect the gender realities they are familiar with. Gender binaries, as we have established, are constantly being included as themes within horror films. They are often played up to the fullest extent. Viet Dinh suggests that characters play act a different gender, both emphasizing gender binaries and the outlandish qualities that are associated with those outside the gender binary. This abuse of gender commentary in transcoded horror provides catharsis for the audience by validating their fear of societal disruption, represented by gender contradictions, and giving transcoded villains the unfavorable fate it suggests they deserve. Audiences are horrified at being the spectator of this implied gender abomination, but also find relief in it when their fears are put to rest by the transcoded character's unfortunate end. Sexuality and terror are essentially connected, argues Carol Clover, because they both bring the uncanny to mind through visceral reactions. Clover describes libido-driven violence, a mainstay in transcoded horror films, as a psychosexual fury, a physical and mental link between primeval feelings of fear and sexuality. Much Hitchcockian violence is tied into corrupted sexuality, and these themes influenced many horror films that came after it, perpetuating transphobic sexual themes. Hitchcock's main motive in his choices of cinematography was to keep the audience in the dark until the big reveal, when Norma's wig falls off and it is shown that she inhabits the same body as Norman. He provides very limited glimpses of the killer during each murder. During Marion's murder, Hitchcock only allows a 2-second shot of the silhouette of a woman holding a knife above her head. We see no face, no defining features, just the faceless threat of pain and death. During Arbogast, the private investigator's murder, we see the action from directly overhead, again blocked from proportions and defining features. The actual stabbing actions are also limited in perspective. The only shots are of a hand holding a knife, swinging it down to meet the character under attack. Without the killer immediately in the picture, Hitchcock strongly focuses on the aftermath, the dead body, the result of this transcoded character's evil work. After Marion is killed, there is a 10-second following shot on the blood flowing down her legs, into the tub, and eventually into the drain where the blood disappears, which fades slowly into a close-up of Marion's dead eye. The initial female victims, Marion Crane in Psycho and Kate Miller in Dressed to Kill, are murdered before they have a chance to notice that their attacker is anything but a cisgender woman with a weapon. The next victims, though, often men like investigator Arbogast in Psycho, are killed because they notice that something is off. Arbogast, for example, finds Norman Bates in full mother costume and is killed immediately upon realizing the secret of her personality. In both films, the final analysis of the transcoded character's condition is conducted. We see the general confusion or tension immediately upon speaking with the character and give a detailed analysis of their mental status. In Psycho, the psychiatrist speaks to the mother personality, as he calls it, because Norman is no longer present in his own mind. He declares that the mother half of Norman's mind has taken over, probably for all time. It must be taken into account, though, that the psychiatrist explicitly states that Norman is not a transvestite or a transsexual. It's heavily emphasized, showing that Hitchcock really wanted to clarify the difference between trans people and this mentally ill cisgender man for the audience. However, as it is just one line, it's easily overlooked or forgotten, especially since the nature of Norman's condition so closely resembles the disruption of the gender binary that trans women follow. As the psychiatrist says, there were two personalities in Norman's mind, Norman and Mother. The mother personality is jealous of other women because she wants Norman to herself. The psychiatrist suggests that if he felt a strong attraction to any other woman, the mother side of him would go wild. It is that idea that Norman was touched by Marion, aroused by her, that aligns with current anxieties about real trans women, that they are driven by sexual attraction. A prominent negative stereotype right now is the idea that trans women are disturbed, mentally ill, and their innate violence is awakened by sexual arousal. Similarly, in Dressed to Kill, the analyzing psychiatrist, Dr. Levy, declares that Dr. Elliot is internally battling with a female personality who is trying to take over. This psychiatrist agrees that Elliot is trans, though. Bobby, the female personality, wanted to achieve a sex change, but Elliot maintained enough control to keep her inside. That is, until he is directly asked whether he wants to have sex with a beautiful woman. Bobby becomes angry with anyone that makes Elliot masculinely sexual, perhaps because it reminds her of her lack of female genitalia. The main causes of these deaths that the psychiatrist gives them are that Elliot was mentally ill with an alternate personality, that that personality was female, and that she wanted revenge on any woman who aroused Elliot, exactly like Norman's mother personality coming out when he becomes aroused. Through studying these films, I have found that trans people, especially trans women, are confined to a handful of stereotypes and tropes in popular horror films. These include that they are sexually deviant, mentally ill, and dangerous. As a result of these sweeping negative generalizations, trans people struggle both internally and externally. Internally, trans people can suffer from internalized transphobia, doubt of their identities, or a fear of the consequences of coming out. Externally, there is legislation and public outcry against our identities, even to the point of violence, and we can encounter prejudice in many areas, including medical spaces, job environments, and family. One way to improve public perception is to depict trans people as complex and not inherently negative in popular media. Rather than confining trans people to a certain type of character, the violent, sexually deviant killer, filmmakers could depict trans people in a variety of human lives and situations, offering more of an opportunity for empathy and allowing people to learn about trans people. Despite all of its difficulties, transness can be enlightening, empowering, and incredibly beautiful. Being trans allows an exploration of one's inner workings that most cisgender people may never approach, also granting the ability to empathize with more than one gender identity because of a wide breadth of experience. These are the types of things I want the world to know about trans people. That we have the same complexities and variations cisgender people do. That we live the same human experience. In a conversation we recently had about our trans identities, my sister Natalie said, if I got up to the pearly gates and God was like, you can do it all over again as a cis woman, I would say no. If I had to choose, I would choose to be trans. I feel lucky. I love being trans. I just wish society wasn't so shit. I feel the same way. Transness isn't a curse. I only see it as a blessing, and I hope we can create a space where trans people can share our own stories so that everyone can begin to see it as a gift. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henry. I open the floor to questions or comments. Please.
That was very enlightening, first of all, so thank you. I have two questions, the second depending on the first, answer the first. I was wondering if you could clarify what transcoding means. I haven't heard that word before.
Yeah, so transcoding or queer coding is a term used to describe the ways that, especially in popular media, that a character is implied to be queer or trans based on their affectations, their dress, just basically the way they're presented, without explicitly saying that they're trans.
So my second question has to do specifically with cycling. I have not seen the cycling stuff. I never thought about his character in that context. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the abuse of himself as a mother kind of translates into this manifestation of his mother identity, and how that fits into the transcoding.
Sure, absolutely. So I can relate that to some of the other films that I was studying before. So in Insidious 2 and in House of the End of the Street and in multiple other films that I didn't study, part of the transcoded character's history is that they were abused by their mother, and as a result, sort of adopted that personality to avoid losing their mother, to sort of continue that Stockholm syndrome kind of thing. But that, while it's not often brought up in popular discussions of transness, it is really notable in transcoded horror films because just that idea of having a negative female influence and having that result in the adoption of like sort of this mentally ill, schizophrenic second personality is a really negative way to think about trans people. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it is like a common kind of stereotype.
Other questions or comments?
I wonder if there's one of those other films that you, if you had time, that you'd like to share just a little bit about what you saw in that that was different or distinctive.
Absolutely. I think definitely the film that I regretted taking out the most was Silence of the Lambs. I had to take it out because the way they describe the transcoded character, Buffalo Bill, is completely different from the story of Psycho and Dressed to Kill. But that character, Buffalo Bill, while it is also specified, like in Psycho, that he is not trans, he is very transcoded because he literally takes the stand off of women to try and make a suit for himself to become a woman. And that is associated in the movie with feelings of jealousy. And that idea that trans women are, or trans people, that identity is a result of jealousy of cisgender women is perpetuated a lot in popular society.
Did Dr. Lund have a question?
Yeah. I like how you connected the films you analyzed with the present moment, and I know you thought about a whole array of films and the present moment. But I was wondering if you could directly speak to the fact that one of these films was made in 1960 and one in 1980, and how you see those films, social context, and how you see them as relevant to the present moment. Are they still kind of icons? Have the way you read them changed at all? Has society changed at all?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so they're still very impactful on horror movies that are being created today. One of the movies that I had to eliminate was called The Trans-American Killer. And just like Dressed to Kill, it mimics a lot of the same elements as Psycho. They don't show the killer right away. She undergoes a sex change in order to specifically murder women that her ex-girlfriend is close to. And there's a very similar bathroom scene as well. So Psycho, while it changed the entire horror genre, also left this huge influence of transphobia on the horror genre and as a whole. So that's still being perpetuated, obviously, in horror media. But that fear of bathrooms that is specifically leading to bathroom bills and things like that wasn't something that people were super concerned about before Psycho and Dressed to Kill. Like, that has arisen since then, like within the past, I'd say 20 or so years. And I think that's really important to think about when we're reflecting on what has been produced in the past and the ways that it's affecting us today.
Time for maybe one quick question. Anyone has a quick question or comment, please?
Do you come across any positive representations of transness in any films or horror?
Actually, absolutely. There's this documentary that I recommend on Netflix. It's called Disclosure. And Laverne Cox is in it, and several other trans celebrities and actors are in it. And they describe a lot of the projects that they've been able to work on that were more positive depictions, as well as describing the negative implications of things they've been involved with. So, off the top of my head, I don't have any examples for you to go and watch, but I do really recommend that documentary. It's very hopeful.
Thank you so much. One last thing. As I said, I was the advisor for Henry during his writing his thesis. It's a pleasure working with him. It was a really challenging moment, as you all might imagine, to be studying trans representation, and Henry did it so beautifully. As you could hear, his film analyses were incredibly insightful. But I would say what I most appreciated about working with you is the times that we had conversations on what kind of writing meets the urgency of this moment. And I thought it was just very brave to include, for instance, your sister's poetry, your own voice, the creative nonfiction that you're working on, and something else. And I think I'm just so impressed with you for being able to, there's so much in this project you didn't see. And I'm so impressed that you're able to pull up together. I can't wait to see what you're in. So Without further ado, I bestow the honor stole. Let me make sure it's right. Put your fancy honors forward.